just going to introduce our 5 panelists and then we'll jump in. So first we'll have Amy Munger, who many of you probably know. She's a recent grad from the Infotech program, and she's an instructional designer at Oregon State. And then next, Emily Palke, who is learning experience designer up at Intel in Hillsboro, I imagine. And then Sam Williams, who is I wrote this one down, Director of Academic Technology Services and Innovation at University of Portland. And then Jeff Kane, who has a few roles, I believe, teacher and education consultant for the Washington State Board of Technical and Community Colleges. And then last, we'll hear from Alexis Terrell, who is currently the Digital Learning and Professional Education Manager at the Center for Health, Work, and the Environment in Colorado. So if you guys would hold your questions to the end, we'll wait for all our panelists to go through, and then we'll have about 15 minutes or so for a Q&A session. So we'll get started with Amy Munger. Take it away.
Oh, look at that. I'm muted. Okay. Thanks everybody for attending. This is great. I just had some thoughts because I'm fairly new to instructional design, things that I was thinking, when I was graduating, maybe would have been helpful to be thinking about. So I work in a higher ed setting, which might be a little bit different than folks that are working elsewhere. And so I think that's really important to consider. My background was in higher ed, so it was an easier transition. But I think the skills are a little bit different than in another context. And also, even within that, there are different models that different institutions work. So we're a concierge model, meaning that we do like a full service model with our folks here. So when we work with an instructor, we're working with them from start to finish on a project, where some other colleges are consultative, meaning that they might come in and just want to consult with you about like a small aspect of their course. They might contact you and say, hey, I'm having a little bit of a problem with this quiz. How might you set it up better? Or things like that. And so the design process is a little bit different depending on kind of where you land. And also with that, we're on a term system versus a semester system. So, the speed in which we're turning out classes is fairly fast. And here at eCampus, we do a 2-term development cycle, meaning that someone starts working with us 2 terms before they're going to launch their course. And so at any point on a typical day, we might be working across like 20 to 30 courses because we're working on 8 courses per term. And so in some ways, that's not a very big load, right? Like if you're doing consultative work, you might be meeting with a lot more folks than that, but the depth is really intense here because you're kind of looking at every single aspect of a course. And also here at OSU, we work on a really big team, which based on some of the conferences I've gone to is not the same everywhere else. So I think we're about 17 instructional designers now. And I think the benefit of that is that there's always someone I can ask, like when I'm like, oh, I don't understand how this setting works in Canvas or what this means exactly. I'm not like on my own looking at things in Google. I just am able to ask someone else. But I think, the things to be aware of is you maybe have a little bit less autonomy as well. So, I can't just make changes that I think are better. I sometimes have to think about how that might affect others on the team. So in terms of skills, project management was a huge piece. And again, working on a team. I came from a much smaller institution before where I did like everything in my work. And so it's been a little bit of a learning curve for me to be like, okay, we have a multimedia team. So what do I do versus what does the multimedia team do? And how do I work with them to make sure that projects get launched on time and meet with the instructors hoping to have done, especially when the instructor doesn't have a lot of experience working with multimedia. So project management is definitely a big skill. Learning to work with subject matter experts is a skill. When you're working with faculty, you have these really highly educated people who've maybe been teaching for a long time. And so you have to think about how to provide feedback delicately to some of the things that they're thinking about doing in their course, and just really respecting them because they bring like a total wealth of knowledge in their field. And it's hard to have someone like look under the hood of your course and be like, I don't like this and I wouldn't do this and you should change this. And so figuring out kind of which battles to pick and how to frame things for people so they're receptive to your feedback's huge. And then you kind of have to do a little bit of like discerning the skill level of your instructors. And that's not always really clear when you're talking with them. So, kind of trying to figure out what is it that they understand that Canvas can and can't do, or what outside tools might they be familiar with. And also what's their capacity, right? So you could design this really cool course, but if your instructor really can't facilitate it because they're going to be really overwhelmed by that external tool, then you've really done a disservice to the students. And so you're sort of trying to read between the lines through your conversations with them about where is their skill level at and how can you support them from where they're at and build their skills as you go along. And so I just, and some other notes that I had about working with subject matter experts is that I'm a big fan of in-person meetings, at least to start, and then moving over to phone and email. I feel like it sets up a certain relationship with this person that you're going to be working with for a long time. And it can be easy to kind of get into these email battles back and forth where you're clearly not understanding each other. And so whenever possible, it's good to take a pause for the cause and meet with people in person, even though sometimes that's uncomfortable. And a lot of our work here, we also do some training. And so you're working with your instructors, but you're also facilitating training with instructors in other courses. And so you have to be able to sort of broadly apply feedback to a lot of different people, even though you don't know their course, and be able to see the alignment. I've learned a lot in this role about seeing like the alignment between what their learning objectives are and what their assessments are, even in areas where I'm like, I don't really understand what business people do, but I have to kind of be able to read and say, okay, well, I think this is a pretty good fit or it's not. So those were some of the things. I know you said just maybe touch on the pedagogy that you use. Most of our courses here at eCampus are social constructivists, and we view the instructor as a guide, but it really depends instructor to instructor. So I don't think that's a hard and fast rule, but that kind of is a glimpse into the work here.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks, Amy.
Mm-hmm.
So next, what did I say? Emily.
Okay, hello. So I am up at Intel, and Intel is a giant company. And I have to explain this because otherwise it doesn't make any sense. So there's Intel, and then there's HR, which is where everybody, that's where most of the training sits, right? It's mostly in HR. But then I'm in sales and marketing. So my group, sales and marketing, got kind of cranky with the offerings from HR, as happens a lot in the business world, I guess. And so my team, I'm on a learning and development team within sales and marketing. So I specifically serve everybody who's out in the field selling, the very fun combination of salesmen engineers and those in marketing. So that's kind of my group. I believe we have 8,000 to 10,000 employees in that group, and it's global. So that kind of gives you an idea of what we're working with. I'm one of 2 instructional designers. And some of the other groups have, for example, some of the salesmen have instructional design backgrounds. They use that, or we'll hire outside companies to kind of come in and supplement what me and my partner are doing. So that's kind of an overview of the general structure of what I'm doing at Intel. My personal background is in K-12 education. I'm a licensed teacher, and then I was at Western Oregon for a while. I was doing my master's, working as an academic advisor, and helping support the student video production team. So when I came to Intel, this was my first venture into not public education. So it's a very, very different world, but it's all very similar. So my day looks like meetings. I have a lot of meetings, and I have to, a big skill that I think everyone should kind of learn is parsing through what meetings you need to be on and what meetings you don't. And then the rest of my day, so I probably have 50-50 meetings, and then the other half would be actually creating the resources. So I create infographics, videos, articulate courses, all kinds of on-demand trainings, as well as supplementing face-to-face instruction. So me and my partner are kind of, we pitch it a lot as there's nothing we can't figure out. It just might take us a minute. So that's kind of what we do. interacting with subject matter experts is something that I'm still navigating. I when I was at the university, I feel like like, okay, yeah, like Amy said, there's a lot of they have a lot of knowledge and they know a lot of what they're talking about, and that applies within this corporate world also. But what's very different are the personalities. I think that people who, the difference between a salesman and somebody who's teaching in public education can sometimes be very different. So that's been something I'm learning to navigate. And my only tip there is find a buddy. I have a buddy who I'll message and I'll be like, okay, I don't know that I'm navigating this right. Can you come proofread this email or make sure that this is going to meet their standards? That's been my saving grace. The other two skills that I think are really critical to being successful, at least in my environment, is project management. I have no background in project management. I know that, like, I know how to make a list to get things done. That's not what they mean, though. So that's a whole other thing. And then Articulate. Adobe Articulate is another one that comes up all the time that I had a little bit of experience with from my infotech degree from Western. But I mean, I'm learning it on the fly as I go. We use Addy pretty regularly. That's the model that me and my buddy follow to make sure that we're going through the process kind of in lockstep and we're not missing anything. She and I will work collaboratively on projects. So that way if we're, I'm like, okay, well, I'm designing still. She'll come in and look and see how it's going and I'll look at hers. But no, my biggest piece of advice is to learn Articulate and to really network. And I'm somebody who hates networking. That's just not who I am. But even something as simple as, hey, I see you work at Intel, like, can I come talk to you about what you do? That's how I got this job. Like, and then a position opened up and someone knew me. So that's the best tip I can give, even if it's that simple. Did I hit everything? I feel like I talked forever. Okay, thanks, Amy.
No, that was perfect. Okay, next, yes, Sam Williams.
All right. So yes, I am Sam Williams over at the University of Portland. So higher ed, folk. And my story is a little interesting in that I started at Western Oregon University 7 years ago. And then that fall, I became the interim director of the department. And that January became the director of the department. And during that time, I inherited a staff of one. So it was myself and the Moodle administrator. And it was that moment that I could either backfill my old position or figure something out. And so I hired our first instructional designer. So Maria Erb, you might have met her at a conference. And so she came on board as our instructional designer, and we built out the first instructional design services for the university. And so that was really fun to actually be in the program at the same time as building out our entire instructional design framework. And then really looking at, what it is that we needed to build out at the university to support our faculty for hybrid and online learning. We're still brick and mortar school, but we're kind of tiptoeing into that online world. And so we have to be able to support the faculty in a great way. So what does a typical day look like for me? We are a small team. So I still have, so I have 4 staff now. I have 8 students that report to me in our student-run multimedia design studio. And within that, we do have to be the consultant, the trainer, the coach, the person that has to close the blinds and have those tough conversations with somebody. And so kind of referring back to some of the stuff that Amy was referring to earlier, we have to provide that full service for the faculty. And you just don't know what's going to come to you on a daily basis or what the provost wants you to work on a daily basis. So, and I have dual reporting back to the CIO and to the provost. And so it's a very interesting place for me to be with my background. So I would say on the theories side of things, which was very interesting for me because I walked into this with an IT background. I'd been in administrative IT services for quite a few years. So the theories were where I had to really catch up when I entered the program. But I really feel like it has framed everything I do. whether we're talking about backwards design, whatever it is. So I have a degree in computer science, marketing, and then for me, the instructional design just kind of tied everything together. So the theories really do help us frame every single project that we walk into, whether or not it's going to be a research project. So when you're learning all these theories and trying to cram them into your head, just be aware that you will definitely use them at some point. Not all the time, but you will use them periodically, whether you're, like I said, the backwards design is the big one we've been working on recently with some faculty. So in the skills area, I will say the project management that was mentioned, I would do a thumbs up on that as well. We had to actually even bring in a consultant on the project management just to kind of run through our entire workflows and make sure that we weren't missing things, and how do we incorporate our students into those workflows. So that was actually a very fun project. The other part of it, I would say, is understand your technology. I put that under the skills area just because you have to be open to all technology. One, you have to be really fluent in your current technology. How are you going to apply all those things to the current tools you have? But then be thinking about, what are the other tools out there? What are possibilities, and not be afraid of those. At the same time, how do you institutionalize that change? How do you grow a particular offering? So if you're finding a brand new tool out in the universe, how does that grow for your institution? Let's see. Okay, so multimedia production. Definitely learn about it, understand it. You don't have to be good at it, but understand graphic design, podcasting, multimedia design. I had to build an entire studio to make that happen. Fortunately, I have 8 students that do it for me now, but I have to understand their workflow, how it applies back to the entire organization, and how it impacts every single design or every single project that we wander into. And the last thing I'll leave you with is accessibility. If you can really jump into anything, accessing higher ground happens in Denver, out in that area every fall. I would highly recommend that conference. The captioning, described audio, contrast checkers, accessible documents. We have to really be thinking about that at the very beginning, not at the end. We really need to be considering our learners at the very, very, very beginning stages. And so in that consultation, when you're building your project, doing your stuff, make sure that accessibility is part of the questions that you really hit home on. You'll find out a lot of people don't know about all the different things around accessibility, but you can learn together. So that's mine.
Perfect, thank you. Yes, that's very important. Thanks, Ellen. Okay, next, Jeff.
Okay. Wow, what a great group of people. I'll start off by talking a little bit about what I do. Let's see, I have a background in teaching English and adult basic education. And I got into technology through working in writing labs, and then online writing labs, and then teaching online. And then I'm also just very interested in education. So I went and got a degree in education, emphasizing online teaching and learning from Cal State University, Monterey Bay, from Hayward. They've changing their name recently. So I've taught for some years. I've also worked as an instructional designer for a number of years in the community college system. And then, let's see, and then I've been a director of academic technology and a director of instructional design. And I'm at this point in my career where I have my own education consulting business. And through that consulting and through my previous work, I have contacts in the Washington State Board for Community and Technical Colleges, and I work there half time. I still teach occasionally, and then I have my own consultation business where I do things like, for instance, I recently finished a quality assurance review for an online program down in San Diego at Saddleback College. Okay, skills required to be successful. I loved everything that I heard previous to what I said, so I would say yes to all of this. When they, talking about project management, communication, listening, learning how to listen to people is a very important part of that communication. And I think what you might notice when you think about all the skills that people said that you needed to have in order to be a successful instructional designer are very similar to the skills that you need to be a successful student. And I don't think that that's a coincidence, or even to be a successful teacher. So for me too, project management was very important. Learning how to, communication. One of the things about this was skills to be successful. I would include, if you have an opportunity to teach, to do that. And that can take all kinds of forms. If you're getting a degree in instructional design or a master's degree, you can teach in the community college, even part-time. You can work with other colleges, create courses online, like a MOOC, and be a facilitator in an online course. I think that you can volunteer. And then I'm in adult basic education, and that's kind of a great entryway into teaching. But one of the things, however you work that out in your own practice, is up to you. But one of the things I think is important for that is when you go to school, you learn a lot about the theories about teaching and learning, and being able to have the practice, being able to have I hate to use this term, but to have a laboratory of what works and what doesn't, and also the credibility that you gain in that. A lot of instructional design positions include presentations and trainings, so that also helps. Let's see. I think that another skill that I think is important is the skill of being able to create community, of being able to create moments where you're able to bring faculty together or bring clients together. And then also that for your own self to participate in a community. And that might be in social media, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn to a certain degree. Also being an active participant in that community. So, blogging, contributing, facilitating conversations. Let's see. Amy Munger, for instance, belongs to the the board for the Northwest e-learning conference. And so things like that are a great place to start. Other ways to connect with larger communities is every year the UNESCO has a call for volunteer instructional designers to work with faculty who are working on open education projects. And a great way to meet people. They offer to send people to the conference this year, for instance, in Slovenia. So let's see. What else would I say? I think that the structures that you learn are very important. I think things like ADDIE and backwards design. Personally, it's what I find is important is that is being engaged and staying connected with the teaching and learning side of things, because as the technology changes and the way that we communicate changes, the way that we teach and learn also changes. When I first started out, constructivism was considered a very radical idea, and So constructivism was a really big deal in the 90s, and it's still very important. I don't feel like these learning theories just kind of get moldy and tossed to the side. I think they kind of build on each other. And that went from social constructivist theory down in California. And when I moved up to Washington in the 2000s, I ran into people like Cable Green, George Siemens, and Stephen Downes, who introduced me to the ideas around connectivism and the idea that that we learn by making connections, and that learning takes place in those connections. And then from there, I got involved in open pedagogy with folks like Jim Groom and Robin DeRosa and people like that. So I think that the theories are very helpful because if you're working with faculty or new clients and they need to see, you know, the structure of what they're going to actually do. And so the theories can provide you with a model that you can give to a faculty member to help them work through their ideas. Also, different faculty members will have different ways of thinking about things. And so if you have different theories at your fingertips, it will allow you to work with a wide variety of clients and faculty. So that's, let's see, I think that covers pretty much what I think, but I think that just participate in the community out there. And your skills will always be up to date, and the technology that you need to use, all of that just falls right into place. So,
thank you. All right, Alexis, last speaker.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
So everybody said everything, so that's it. As Amy had said, I work for the Center of Health, Work, and Environment. It's at the University of Colorado, part of the Colorado School of Public Health. We're on the Anschutz Medical Campus. So we are a center, we kind of run independently, but we're part of the university as well. But everything I do is around continuing education for working professionals. I design trainings around occupational health, safety, and well-being. So we are largely funded by NIOSH, which is the education and research arm of OSHA. So anybody in a workplace, basically, who has safety standards to deal with, looks to others for training. So we have a regional sort of obligation, but we're definitely, there are 18 of these ERCs around the country, and we are probably the leader in online education. So I do design a lot of online educational materials. They're mostly self-paced trainings, and we have an administrative assistant, we have a student worker, we are hiring an instructional designer, but currently I've been doing it all. And we don't only do online trainings, we also do a lot of live and in-person trainings. So my instructional design skills are used for both. And I think that's a growing norm, that whatever applies to making learning objective more clear, making content more engaging and more accessible for learners, what's going to work online is also usually good face-to-face. And so having those crossover skills is huge. I definitely agree with everything everybody said about the skills that it takes to be successful, project management, anything with communication. My background is as a journalist and also as an ESL teacher. And so having the skill set to kind of take more complex information and boil it down to communicate it in a simple, clear way is huge. And having the skill to build consensus, like Amy Munger was saying, and everybody else, sometimes it's a lot of I almost feel like salesmanship working with SMEs to get them on board. And so I would say that I don't use consciously, I'm not using like instructional design theories when I'm talking to people. I think I've internalized it in my own head, but what I use a lot of is explaining sort of the science and research behind best practices in educational theories and communication theories and how people learn, and how people retain information, because that's usually what sells it to a lot of these scientific types. And I work with a lot of doctors, not all, and I'd say it's easier to work with non-faculty members because they are usually more open to feedback and ideas about about education. Whereas if they've been teaching a while, they're like, I know it, I've got it, I'm the PhD here. So just kind of knowing how to approach all those different personalities is going to be helpful. I was also thinking that the visual design side is not something I expected to use so much, but I think that if I could take more courses in visual design, I would. I, like Emily, use Articulate for most of the work I do, and I've had to learn several different types of LMSs because I'm not working for academic degree seeking students. It's very different, and the LMSs that are out there, it's not Canvas or Moodle or Blackboard. I use Crowd Wisdom, but they're all just a little different and similar, and so I'd say that my day can change so much, and it might be the actual like content design. I might be like matching objectives to assessment outcomes. Evaluation is a huge piece, and also customer service and being able to troubleshoot when things go wrong online, or when people are just having questions about, maybe I want to sign up for this training, whether it's face-to-face or online. How do I get my certificate? What are you going to teach? Like, hey, I have experience in XYZ, can I do this? A lot of people who are taking these online classes don't have experience doing anything else online. So it is very much like ground level, like, okay, what's your browser? And like trying to figure out like how old their computer is and explaining that maybe their internet connection is just too slow. And marketing. I end up marketing a lot of courses myself too, and doing sort of the data collection and trying to get a sense of what's working, what's good, and trying to promote the courses more widely that way. So it's definitely kind of a one-stop shop. And then the fun days are sometimes, sitting in a recording studio, and we have a videographer we hire out, but I will end up doing a lot of the editing myself. And same thing for audio and other video. Those multimedia skills are huge, and I've learned a lot of that just on the fly through practice. What else would be very helpful? Oh yeah, and I think a large part of my day is spent explaining what instructional designers do. So having a good answer for and it's not going to look the same, but really communicating to people how they can best use me, and advocating for our profession as a whole is a huge part of my job. So maybe that's a good overview to get us started.
Yeah, that was great. Yes. Okay, so now I'm going to open it up to questions that people have. If you have a question, you can just unmute yourself and talk. Questions?
Can I add something to what Alexis was saying? Alexis, you were talking about using theory to kind of help drive the conversations around why something should be this way. And I do the same thing a lot. And the pushback that I get is, why would I do this when I could be making money? Because there's commission-based salespeople. So that why, why is this helpful? Why should I be doing this? Okay, you say it'll help me remember, but can you actually back that up? Those kind of things are really, really important, more than I realized.
Yeah, and if I'm able to sort of drive it to the learner experience, which in turn is either going to help them with their sales or with their overall, sometimes it is HR I'm dealing with, or if it's a faculty member and it's your student evaluations, that's what they're thinking in terms of, so figuring out what their motivation is and to use that to sort of, to frame it that way. So, yeah. That made me think of something else, but I lost it.
I would say I'm just going to pop in then while you're thinking of that, while we wait for questions here. And on the motivation side of things, it's really decoding people's motivations. So I just had a professor come in and And sometimes my instructional designer and some other people don't hear it. So I have to kind of remind them, as somebody went through, they said, oh, my goal is to be the best online instructor I could ever be. And they're like, oh, that's so great. That's a great goal. And they finished their meeting. I was like, they just gave you an in. They just gave you an in into their world. You need to jump on it. You need to make them the best online teacher they can be. So follow back up with them, follow up with the meetings, follow up with plans, don't let it stop there. If somebody gives you a tiny bit of an in into their world, because it's very difficult for people to be that vulnerable, especially people at that PhD level where they're expected to be experts all the time.
Jose.
I saw a question come through from Jose.
From Jose. All right.
If you're developing online content, how do you assess user interface and experience effectiveness and quality? Does anybody have a solid answer?
I mean, for us, I do a lot of beta testing with sort of people who are in that field, but a wide variety of sort of stakeholders or partners that we have, and get their experience. And usually there's a pretty wide range of people with sort of the knowledge education. So we always do like a soft launch of all of our courses. We check it ourselves, and I have people in-house who will review and like take it as a student, but then we kind of do a soft launch with some other external partners to get them and get their feedback on what made sense to them, if a button didn't click in the right place, or just their feedback.
We do something similar where we'll like test internally, and then we have a collection, like a list of people who we call our learning enthusiasts. And they're folks we tap on to be like, hey, can you just like try this really quick? They're really good allies for us, but we have to tap stakeholders to help us with that.
Same thing over at the University of Portland. We try to test across all different, mobile device, desktops, operating systems, browsers. We do a lot of the internal testing ourselves, and then we will roll it out to a couple students. Depends on the audience for it, but we will always try to find allies around the community who are willing to give us very pointed feedback and not be afraid of pointed feedback.
Yeah, we do the same thing at the state board. We do a lot of courses that, for instance, we have a course on badging that we're rolling out. And what'll happen is that we'll go through an internal review, and then we'll pilot it. And when we ask for the volunteers, I've noticed the same thing. It's the same. We have the same 12 people who always step up and help us out because they don't want to be left out on the latest thing, so.
Emily, I have a question for you. You can hear me okay? Can you hear me okay? Okay. So I know your title is Learning Experience Designer, right? So how does that differ from being an instructional designer? It doesn't?
It doesn't. I'm actually the learning experience developer, and then my coworker, my other ID is the learning experience designer, but we kind of use them interchangeably. It was just to differentiate us from the IDs in HR. It's a whole Intel politic thing.
Okay. And do you think that's pretty similar across the field, or do you think that's specific to Intel, that it's interchangeable?
I think that it's across the field, because when I was looking at instructional design positions, when I was like looking out in the world, they don't always use the word instructional designer. They might use something like adult education expert or learning experience developer, which is this one. Learning development specialist are other ones that I've seen. And they're all, when you break down the roles and responsibilities, it's all instructional design.
Okay, thank you.
The most annoying title right now, I think, is learning engineer.
Ooh.
Yes. I've seen that one.
I'm curious from Amy over at OSU, because you have 17. What is that how does that question apply to OSU?
In terms of developing online content, the effectiveness, or the design title?
Like the title scenario, like, because it sounds like you might have people that are very focused potentially, or?
Yeah, so we're all instructional design specialists is the official term, but I think most of us go by instructional designer, like if we're introducing ourselves. And typically it's more broken out by, it's not 100%, but like the programs you're working with. So I work with a lot of human development and family science courses, and I work with a lot of women, gender, and sexuality studies courses. So my title might be sort of similar, but there's people that I might tap into more because like a lot of the liberal arts classes tend to be set up in a certain way, right? So we're going to have like a lot of discussion boards or essay type questions versus like some of the computer science, they might have to like come up with a very specific type of coding or whatever. And so we're kind of broken up a little bit on the types of courses we generally focus on, but it's not exact because that's always changing, right? Like there's different courses coming on for either new development or redevelopment or whatnot. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I think each of us kind of has specialty. And then we were lucky here in that I think, get some freedom so folks kind of focus on things that they're interested in. So we have some folks that really specialize in accessibility and some folks that specialize in inclusivity and some folks that are looking at, visual design best practices and things like that. But I think that is more directed sort of by the instructional designer's interest.
I have a question for Jeff. So you're a consultant and you started your own business. How did you do that? Or what advice would you have for somebody who wanted to kind of be a freelancer?
Oh, well, it's there's a big part of it is I think just like I didn't know that this was going to be as helpful to me later on in my career as it turned out to be, but participating in online communities, taking advantage of volunteer opportunities, all of that really helps you develop a portfolio. I've had people contact me just because they've read my blog. They read something on my blog. It was similar to something that they wanted to do at their college, so they'll have me come out, or we'll have an online meeting. The other thing too is like not being afraid to step out of your comfort zone. It's probably obvious that I've been working in academia for a while, but I've through my connections with working with nurses, and health information management, I wound up doing some projects for a local medical group here in Washington State, where they wanted to figure out how much of they didn't know at the time with how much of their training they could put online, and so I came and worked with them on that. Let's see. Then and then also kind of out of my comfort zone, and an example of some of these things that happen that I would know about because I'm participating in the community. But there was there's a startup EDU happens in Seattle, and at first I thought it wouldn't be something I would be interested in doing because it sounded very like big business commercial kind of operation. But the more I thought about it, the more I said, well, there's going to be a lot of people at this event for who are connected to different colleges and different organizations, and that turned out to be the case. And it's a startup event that takes place over 3 days, where you build a project in those 3 days with a team that's assembled right there at the conference, and it was totally free. And the people who and at the end of the conference, people vote on the projects that they want to see move forward, and it was a blast. I met a lot of people, so making connections at all different levels, are possible there.
Yeah, definitely. Or networking. Okay, I saw that Carrie had a follow-up question for Amy. She says, did you choose your specialties or did the university assign each ID to different ones?
No, it's I think mostly like instructional designer led in terms of specialization. I see what you're saying. I'm rethinking that. No, the courses that I'm assigned in terms of which department I'm in were assigned to me. But they do, I think, kind of look at your background. So for instance, there's a woman on our team that works with a lot of foreign language classes, but her background was teaching foreign language. So I think they look at somewhat the work that you've done before and see how you might connect well with it. Or there's, people here that have worked in computer science, and so they're going to be a better fit for, those sorts of courses. So I think they're assigned to you, but I think you have some input in sort of saying what are your interests or your background that might inform where it might be easier for you to step in and work with folks.
I have a networking job search tip. When you're looking for like instructional design positions out in the corporate world, like outside of higher ed, it's all through LinkedIn. And even after I was hired at Intel, I was receiving messages on LinkedIn about positions that they wanted, like recruiters wanted me to apply for. And so what I found out pretty quickly is if you see a job posting you want to apply for, find the recruiter on LinkedIn and message them, because their job is to fill that position. So they want people that they're happy to see you. They're not going to be annoyed. But I was blown away by the effectiveness of LinkedIn as far as like finding a position. And then the portfolio that a lot of people choose to do as like their culminating infotech project was actually really instrumental in being hired also. Yeah, I even modified it and I used it for my interview. And so it was super easy because I had all that information, all of my work's already up online that I was able to link and show my interviewers, hey, here's some of the work that I've done.
If you haven't done your essays already, you might also think about where might you want to work and what might they be interested in, and then write your essays based on that. Because I wrote a couple that were like questions on whether online education was good or bad. And I was like, I'm not sure I really want this on my outward facing portfolio. And there are many topics that I could have thought of. So that might be a good reason to reach out to someone, is just like, hey, I'm interested in working in your area and I want to be up on the newest research. What things might what are your teams asking about or interested in? And then focusing your research that way so that you have something that's like tantalizing to those folks when you are applying.
In your specific workplace, what would you say those issues are right now? This is a question for everybody. Inclusivity and diversity is always big here in terms of like how do we meet students with different backgrounds. I think we were just meeting. We have a research unit here at OSU, which is unique and really great. And unfortunately, it seems like they were like, you can probably throw a dart at any topic and there's not very much research there. So if there's like a topic that you see, there's a lot of information on how you might address it in an in-person format. There's not always the equivalent in terms of how that could be offered online, which I found really challenging when I was doing my paper. This didn't really answer your question, but it was challenging when I was like, oh, I'm really interested in this topic and I'm finding all this information about how I would do this in person and nothing online. I think that's the case with the field, but I think if you can find any of those things and draw correlations, there's some, I don't know, I think that's always juicy.
Effective corporate mobile learning. I'm gonna leave it at that. Like that's what is really driving our team crazy, because it's a big ask. Everyone wants like, well, I want mobile learning. And we go, okay, what about it do you want? And they go, well, I want it on my phone. Well, we can have it on it's already available on your phone. So it's effective corporate mobile learning.
I think that one of the things that that's really driving our work right now is accessibility and the lack of accessibility. So I was with Sam when he was talking about starting out with making things accessible, and so universal design is a very important piece. And what we wind up, at the state, we have to work on buying learning management systems and all of these tools. And one of the things that you find out is that programmers and corporate folks aren't as focused on that. And often that's our fault too at the director level, as when you say, okay, we have a process for acquiring software that says it has to have a VPAT, which outlines how accessible they are. And then our procurement process says, do they have a VPAT? Yes. So we mark off yes, and then it goes on to the next thing. You actually take a look at some of these documents, and it's just shocking how inaccessible a lot of these tools are. So, so overcoming that is a full-time job for a number of people who are supposedly instructional designers.
And I'm just going to echo that one more time on accessibility. And that is, but another thing you can do is align yourself with your accessible education group on campus, sometimes with disability services. So I'm really good friends with the director of that department. And so we will meet and talk about, what's the current state of our campus? How, do we have deaf students? Do we have blind students? Kind of where is that? Where should we be looking? Where should we be focusing? And I also sit on the ADA committee for the campus. So you get to hear about all the other things that are happening around accessibility on your campus. And so I would say it goes back to that the community building and the other things, but there's some very key people on your campuses, whether it is higher ed or whether it's an Intel campus, but there's some key people that do have passions in those specific areas that dive deeper than you will. So meeting those people is very important.
Okay, we probably have time for one more question. Sandy said she'd like to hear each of you give a definition, maybe one sentence definition of an instructional designer.
The way that I pitch it to everybody I work with is I'm an instructional designer, and I'll build what it is that you want to use for your learning. And that starts the conversation.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I was going to say, it kind of depends on who I'm talking to and knowing my audience a little bit, but ultimately it's going to be something about, I'm here to make your course better.
I would say it's definitely walking into a scenario saying, hey, I'm here to collaborate with you and work with you on something. But really, we act as that interpreter between the technology, the faculty, and the student. So we're kind of that middle person.
Yeah, I tell them that instructional design is bringing the ideas behind teaching and learning into the subject matter. So you have somebody who's an expert on math, but they're not experts on teaching and learning. And then apart from that, I tell them that we're the Swiss Army knives of education.
I usually find myself saying things, well, if I'm working with an instructor, I say something much better, but I'm realizing I should change my pitch. I often say to people, have you ever taken a horrible online sexual harassment training that was done by a really uncreative instructional designer? So I'm not going to say that now anymore. I've learned so many better things to say. But with instructors, they're pretty familiar with us here, so that helps. But I often say, my goal is to help you figure out what's working and not working in your courses and see how we can, make some adjustments that might better help you meet some of the parts of your course that are painful if they've like taught it before and they're just finding the same things not working. And I also usually tell them, like, I'm an advocate for the students because they're not here, but they're going to be the big user. So you have to tell me that I'm asking for too much, or that this won't work for your course, or it doesn't meet your teaching style. But I'm always going to say, I'm thinking about how students can experience this. And so that's the role in which I see myself in a lot, is to advocate for students that maybe don't have as much opportunity to give that feedback directly to their instructor until after the course is already in motion.
Yeah, good. Okay, so let's wrap it up. I just wanted to say that this has been very good and validating for me, actually, as the instructor of the instructional design class, because we talked about all the things pretty much that you guys have touched on. We talked about accessibility and visual design week 3, because I wanted students to be able to work on those at the start and not at the end. Talk about universal design for learning and all the theories, and so it's been good to know that it's on the right track. Thank you. So thank you all our panelists and attendees for coming and talking to us. I'm recording, and then I'll share the recording with everybody once it's done. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you. Nice meeting everyone.